And this webinar was created to give new Iray users and not so new a better understanding of how the user interface and materials work with Iray, while we create an image that will go from just your standard defaults into a more customized look. Now, while while the Reolution did a great job at doing the auto conversion from CC3 and iClone PBR materials to the Iray ones, sometimes you need a little extra push on the Iray side to make them truly shine, pun intended. So let's go ahead and take a look at what these features are, and we'll go from there. Also keep in mind that whatever we do inside CC3 is also applicable inside iClone, because the UIs are very similar. So the only difference is that anything that is animation related is only applies to iClone, of course. So let's get started because we have a ton of stuff to cover. We're mostly going to be at working on CC3, but however, just remember that this also applies to iClone. So when we first start here, as you can see here, it is our pretty much default workflow or workspace. And hold on a second, I'm having here some, my menus are blocking some of my windows here. Okay, no, still in there. Hold on, let me move this to the other side. Okay, I couldn't get it to there, sorry. So in here, we have our workspaces. Right now we have on the standard workspace, and what we're going to do here is I am going to change to my workspace 5, which is one that I have already modified. So basically the reason I'm doing this is so that I can be consistent between our CC3 and iClone UI. And all I did here is basically move all my tabs to my right-hand side, and I kept the render tab here, which is basically this tab over here. If you click this on and off, you'll get it there. And the reason I do this is so I can frame my render. And this is why is this important? This is important because when you render an Iray preview, you will notice that it mimics whatever is in your preview window. So the scale and the size. So notice here that my viewport here resolution is 712 by 962. So that's exactly what is going to render on the Iray preview window. Now, before we get to this, is for some reason you do not see the Iray menus up here on the toolbar. What you have to do is you go to the plugin Iray, and then you go and make sure that this is checked in. Okay. So if it gets lost for some reason, if you're like here and all of a sudden you do not see that toolbar over there, just go to plugins Iray and make sure that that's checked in. Okay, same thing in iClone, the iClone side of things. You will notice my mouse goes off screen. This is because I'm working with 2 screens over here. So that's all there is to that. And again, if you can't find it inside iClone, this toolbar over here, all you got to do is make sure that you go to your plugins, Iray, and then make sure the toolbar is checked in for the checkbox over here. All right. So as I was saying, it is important for the aspect ratio of your viewport here for us to be able to control that, because what we see is what we get here inside the Iray preview window. And you will notice that, however, that if the second you start moving around this the window or start moving around your menus, the resolution here is going to start to change. So, and as soon as you start changing that, you will notice that it's also going to start refreshing your preview window for the Iray. And this could shave, could add a lot of extra seconds of rendering time, which turns into minutes, which could turn into hours if you're working with long periods of time. So one way to avoid this is using, again, this workspaces. So if I go to my workspace and I have already a pre-saved workspace, this will bring me back exactly to that aspect ratio here, which is 712 or 962. Again, it doesn't have to be those numbers. It could be whatever numbers you choose. I choose this because I want to render in portrait mode as opposed to landscape. So that's the way I like it. So in order to keep this preview window from being refreshed every time we move our menus, what you could do is go to custom here, make sure that that's locked. And now inside here, if you don't have this array tab here for render settings, all you got to do in the toolbar is click on this icon over here. This will bring it up. So if I click again, see, it brings it up. Go to render settings, which is the last tab here inside the array tab. And here, make sure you set this to custom. Now, with that locked in place, notice now that when we move our menus around, there's no refresh over here. So this will save you from having the window re-render every time you do a change on your UI. So this is a very helpful hint right there. All right, so another thing I do when I work on inside CC3, and this is mostly CC3 because in iClone you can actually save cameras. In CC3 you cannot save cameras, multiple cameras, so you're always working within the viewport space. Is what I like to do is go into content, into our stage elements area, and make sure that I go to cameras over here, and make sure that I save that cameras. Once I like the camera once I know that this is the camera I want to use, for my images, I go ahead and save this. So notice now that if I rotate, move my character here, trying to get back to what it was before, it would be really, really hard. So, and it wouldn't be exactly the same. So if you need to, for example, get back to that particular view that you had before, is always best to save that camera. I did so with this one. So I'm going to go ahead and double click here, and you will notice here that will bring us right back to where we were before. And now it's going to re-render this. So now if we do multiple renders and then we save the file and we need to come back to the exact same position, the camera position that we had before, we can always do that by doing this little trick right here. So now that we have our proportions and the camera set here, let's go ahead and start working with the environment, because right now our environment is not it's not the proper environment for our gladiator over here. So as you can see, we're going to go to visuals here, just so you can see which HDR we're using, or image-based lighting we're using, and it's like interior of an exterior patio, and he definitely does not belong into a place like this. So let's go ahead and change him. I'm going to go ahead and take the blur off here so you can see what's going on there. And as you can see, not only he doesn't fit in that space, he's also, like, proportion wise, he is totally off scale. So let's go ahead and give me something more suitable for this gladiator. So let's go to content here, and inside the stage tab, we're going to go into atmospheres and go here to templates. And I don't know if you guys were aware or not about our Light Studio package. It comes with a lot of awesome presets and a lot of tools for you to light your characters. For this particular one, we're going to just use one of their presets here. And this is called Kiara Noon. So let's go ahead and double click on that to bring that atmosphere. And basically, this brings in an IBL and lights into the scene. So I'll show you this in a second as soon as this is loaded. One thing I would recommend, however, and that is, before you actually bring in any atmosphere, I would either pause this. Right now I can't do this, but before you actually bring in your images or your atmospheres, whatever change you decide to do, make sure that you go ahead and pause this. Otherwise, it's going to take some time for this to refresh the image and then auto convert it, and then get the image afterwards. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do exactly that. We're going to pause the renderer, so no matter what we do here, it will not update. So this will not slow you down in the workflow. So this is a good way to work when you're doing multiple changes. Just remember to pause it. You can either press F12 if you want to. By the way, if you want to bring the preview window up, you can also press F11 or click on this icon over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a few more extra changes. I'm going to take the blur off because I want to see where he's at. And the other thing I'm going to do here is I want to make sure he's standing on land, because right now he looks like the green giant here. So let's go ahead and push Shift I. This will bring us our gizmo to rotate our IBL. And I'm going to go ahead and just pick a spot where there's ground. So something about there. This looks good. So let's go ahead here and let's press Shift I again. And now we can go ahead and press play. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and go to my scenes tab here and make sure that any lights that are available here, I'm going to completely turn them off. Now, this right now is using this light as a sunlight, but I believe that our IBL can hold on its own. And the reason why I do that is because when you do Iray renders, try always to use the image-based lighting first, because this will give you the cleanest render first. And afterwards, you can go ahead and tweak and start adding lights as you need them. But just be aware that the more lights you bring in, the slower the render is going to become. So, and also the noisier the render is going to become. So keep that in mind. All right, so let's go ahead here and turn that off. So we did already. So the light it's off, and I'm going to go ahead and press the play button so it starts refreshing. And notice right there, we have a pretty good lighting setup right there. And it's just all IBS entire, is this all based on the IBL lighting? We can go ahead and control this a little bit more and maybe bring out the strength a little bit more, something like 45. That should be a good value there. So we got plenty of light there. And what we're going to do here is notice that he is not grounded on the image because we are against an HDR background. So what we can do here is we can go into our Array tab here, and inside our environment tab, there is something called the ground plane. Now notice that as soon as I turn it on, all of a sudden, this looks like it has a reflection on the ground. And since we're standing on dirt, we don't need any reflection whatsoever. So let's take the glossiness, which is basically blur reflections, and take it down all the way down to 0. Another thing you will notice is that the feet are under a little bit under the ground plane. So you can see here, you can't see the feet completely in there. So this looks kind of cool because it looks like sand on the feet. But to fix that, all you have to do is go to the height and put a value. And this one is about, I think, -3, I believe. And yeah, -3. So there you go. Now we have the feet right there. And now he looks solid, grounded on our image-based lighting background. Now, we're going to go ahead, now that we have the ground, we're going to talk about a few other features here that are very important. The next one here is, next to preview render, is the preview selected. And this is a very cool feature that could help you with your speed. And what's going to happen here is once you select this, for example, you will notice that our character is going to disappear. And why is that? If you go into, as you can see here, it disappears. So if you go to the render settings, you will go all the way down. There is a preview selected feature here. And you notice that only the sky is in this list. In order to see whatever is in your preview window, you need to select what you want to have inside the render window, and you make sure you add it to that list. Now, by doing so, you can see now the helmet is there. Now, let's go ahead and select a few more items here. Get the shield, the sword, and so forth. Now, one thing you could do is, for example, if you want to bring everything at once into your render window, into your selection list, you can just select the character and just bring that in instead. So by doing so, it will bring all of its accessories and clothing and everything that comes with it. So, however, if you want to just target just everything but the skin, for example, you can always just select the character itself now and just remove the character. And now you have this ghost-like character in here in the scene where he could be fighting, you're fighting against the invisible man here. So, however, it's very important to understand that once you're in this mode, it will only render what's in this window. In other words, if I now decide to go ahead and turn on a light here, you will notice that there will be 0 change happening into the lighting for this character. And this is because this light is actually not inside our preview selected window list. So if you want that particular spotlight to be in here, you got to make sure you add it to that list. Notice that by doing so, I can go ahead now and that gets added. And now it's rendering. That spotlight is rendering in there as well. Now, in order to avoid any confusion and not forgetting things to bring in and out of here, I'm going to go ahead and just use the standard render window without the render selected. And I'm going to use a brand new feature that Iray 1.1 brings in, which is your render region, which is really, truly a fantastic tool. Now, notice here that when we turned on that light, all of a sudden we have this huge shadow on our character. This is because lights actually are models inside Iray. So you'll notice here, once we turn this completely off, the shadow disappears. So, that's something you want to, think about when this is happening. So what we're going to do here is, since, like I said, let's stay with IBLs only, just for the sake of speed and cleanliness. Because notice that there's almost zero pixelation going on here. This image is actually quite clean here. So let's go ahead and the next thing we're going to do here is inside Iray. Okay. So the next thing is, as I was mentioning, is our render region. And render region is a very cool tool because it will concentrate all of the power of Iray on that particular region that you want to render. Now, pressing the let's talk about a little bit about the preview render UI. You have here different zoom in modes. You can do an out of fit, which is what's going on right here. You can do actual size, which is it will make you see the image to the actual pixel resolution. And this is kind of important because sometimes you may be rendering a much higher resolution, but if you have this to fit the window, you're not going to be able to see the full anti-aliasing happening here, and you may see some artifacts on the edges because the image is actually reduced or compressed. So just make sure that if you're rendering at 4K in this particular window, I wouldn't know why you would want to do that, but if you do that, if you render much higher and you need to see some detail here on the mask, for example, and you want to render a higher resolution, you can, and then you just press a control slash to backslash or forward slash actually to zoom in into that particular area. And another thing you can do here is within this area, you can press the Alt key, and you can with the left mouse button, you can pan, and with the mouse wheel, you can zoom in into that area. So that's exactly what I'm doing. But notice this is not a camera move. You're actually zooming in into pixels into the 2D image here. You're panning right now on the 2D image. This is not a camera thing. So that's why it doesn't need to re-render anything here. So if you need to concentrate in just one area, instead of zooming in with the camera, which the more pixels you throw into the camera, and the bigger it needs to cover the image with pixels, the longer that render is going to take. So zooming into the pixels is much more efficient than having to actually zooming in with the camera like so. Notice that if we do that, sure, we get a lot more detail, but then what's happening is you are rendering a lot more pixels into the screen, thus making your render going a lot slower. So keep that in mind when we're working. So like I said, this is going into cameras, and saving that camera precision is a major time saver. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring in that camera and go back to the way we were. And this, of course, is going to update over here, and we're going back to the way we were. So saving that camera is very important. Saving your workspace once you like the aspect resolution of your image. Save your workspace so that way you can always get back to always the exact same position of the camera, exact same aspect ratio. So you can always render that image exactly the same. So, okay, so this is working great. Our next feature here are your zooming features. Of course, this is self-explanatory. We don't have to go into that. Next is your RGB, and here are your channels that you actually render. In this case, if you go to Iray presets, you will notice here that you have compositing elements. And this is right now, I only have glossy and specular selected. I could have selected any other features, and of course, when you do your preview, it will render those as well. Now, what's the difference? For example, some people get confused as what's the difference between glossy and specular? Well, actually, there is a pretty big difference, and I will show you this in a second. Now I'm going to select the helmet here and not the feather, but the metal part of it. And I'm going to go ahead and select region here and render region there. And let's go ahead and zoom in here. Now, when I swap here to my different layers, to specular layer, notice that there is really nothing going on here. But when I go to my glossiness layer, you can see the helmet there. And notice that that the glossiness here is most of the character. This is because any reflective material that has roughness, it goes under glossiness. So, and anything that is purely reflective goes into specular. So notice here that we have here absolutely nothing going on. This is because our mask material here has a lot of roughness. So if I go here into my materials, you can see that there is a lot of roughness into our material right here. However, let's go into Iray and go to our multiplier here. And let's go ahead and reduce the roughness to 0. Now you'll notice here that all of a sudden we can see something here in our specular path. And when we go to glossiness, the mask has disappeared in this particular layer. And this is because there is no roughness applied into that material. So that's the difference between glossy and specular. Specular is mostly about purely reflecting materials, where glossiness is blur reflections. So, and notice here now this is becoming to disappear because we're applying more and more roughness into our material. So let's go ahead and move on here. RGB, go back up to RGB. The next one is use transparency. This is useful if you want to render your image against an invisible background, and then you can put it into different backgrounds by doing so. Just make sure that the next feature, however, is a tricky one if you have transparency on, because this will, if you copy this into a buffer and then try to paste this into another program such as Photoshop, you will get some kind of error. So if you're rendering something that has a transparency background, a transparent background, make sure that you actually save the image in order to get the file to work properly, okay? That's something that is not very clear sometime in the documentation. So let's go ahead and turn this back on again, so we can see the background here. And of course, this is your save image. So yeah, that's self-explanatory right there. And let's go ahead in here and let's talk about the ground. And in order to talk about the ground here, the ground plane that we have here in Iray, there is a little bit of an issue here when we start switching modes. Now, you will notice that in Iray 1.1, we have something that is called interactive. And unfortunately, in interactive mode, the ground plane does not work very well. So notice here as I switch from photoreal into interactive, there is this garbage going on the ground. This is not a Reallusion thing. This is an Iray thing, unfortunately. And until they fix this, Reallusion won't be able to fix this. So keep that in mind. However, there is a fix to this, and the fix would be like this: you turn off your ground plane, which is basically like a fake or a shadow casting plane, like you have originally inside iClone. And then what we're going to do is bring in a prop. So I'm going to go ahead and bring an actual prop that is for the ground. And to do so, I'm going to go here again into Stage Elements. I'm going to go into Props, Custom. And in here, I made a ground plane already. So I'm going to go ahead and double click this to bring it into the scene. All right, and you will notice here now that the scene is getting rebuilt here because we added geometry. And in a second, this is going to refresh, and all of a sudden, we're going to have a shadow back again. There's our shadow back. So now that we are, and notice here, we're still in interactive mode. So this is a way that you can have an actual shadow on a ground if you need to. Another reason why I do this sometimes is because that our IBLs may be 4K, but we're only seeing a section of that 4K, which makes the image a little bit blurry. So you're going to have this very sharp rendered character against a very blurry background, even the ones that are by the feet here, and it's going to look blurry. So it's not going to look like it's actually blending in, the character is blending in with the background. So what you can do is create this kind of fake background. That way you can blend it against that background, that image-based lighting background. And what I did here is a very simple cheat here. Notice that I have on, this is simply a simple plane here that I took from iClone. So for in here, let's go back to iClone over here. And all I did was create primitive, and I just did floor. And this is just, all this is just a simple square here, and this is what I'm using for ground. And then what I did here is I just took that and applied inside here, actually I applied a substance material, and then I baked the textures, and then I added this opacity map right here. It's a very simple opacity map where it goes a solid white into black. And this will give you this smooth gradient, so it allows you to blend the ground into that image-based background, image-based lighting background. So this is a very useful tool here to be able to blend. And notice now that our ground is as sharp as our character, so it blends well when you create your images. Now let's go back to photoreal here. Another question, another thing to keep in mind is you will notice that while this is really moving fast here in our renderer, and people believe that for interactive should be even faster. But notice that when you try to update something, let's go ahead and do a very small change. I don't know, just in here, I'm gonna double right click and change the brightness a little bit here, so it refreshes. Notice that in interactive mode, it feels like it's going slower than if we were rendering photoreal. And why is this happening when interactive should be faster? The reason is the convergence of the pixels into, let's go ahead and render just a small area here and zoom in into that area. And let's go to 150. And you will notice here that if we go into photoreal first, our render will look a little bit grainy. And this is because, again, this has to do with calculations. And in photoreal mode, you're doing a lot more calculations, and there's a lot more intense ray tracing happening in photoreal versus in interactive. So if you want to compare apples to apples, one thing you should do is make sure that you your samples are a third of whatever you're using for photoreal, and then you'll have an apples to apples time comparison. Now, in interactive, there's one thing you got to keep in mind is that when you render in interactive mode, you do not have any GI. So if you want any kind of GI or global illumination, you got to go ahead and turn it on, because by default, it's not going to be on. So you're not going to get any kind of bounce from the ground into the character and so forth. So let's go ahead and take this render region off so it can do the full thing. And you can see that best in this area over here by also having GI. You can have two modes. You can have diffuse and specular here. So if I do both here, now you have reflections also being applied on the GI calculations. So everything will become a little bit brighter and so forth. So why would you want to use interactive versus photoreal? Well, photoreal has extra calculations that interactive does not have. And let's go ahead and concentrate in this area over here near the shield, and you will see what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and zoom in here. Again, we are going to go first. We're going to let this finish up. One thing also you can keep in mind is the more features you add into interactive, of course, the slower is going to get. So if you start getting into adding more rays, like medium, it adds more rays into the calculation. And then high obviously brings a lot more rays into the calculation as well. So this will definitely slow you down. So a cool way to work with is using interactive is, let's do, the general lighting overall first with interactive. And then when you start concentrating on the details, then you can go ahead and switch back into photoreal and just render the areas that you need to render. Now, let's talk about differences between one and the other. So in here, for example, notice that notice the difference here in the shadow areas looks kind of flat and so forth. And in here, the bounce from the skin into the reflective metal is really not there. Now, notice what happens when we switch back into photoreal mode. Now, all of a sudden here, you have a much richer image because you're actually getting bounce from the skin into the reflections. And there's a lot more going on here, including the is reflecting subsurface happening on the skin. And you have a brighter here reflection overall. So just these are a few things that you want to keep in mind. Also, another difference between interactive and photoreal is that if your scene is being illuminated strictly by emissive surfaces, by default, because the interactive mode starts off without GI, by default, this is going to come out very dark. So if your scene is lit only with emissive surfaces, this image is going to be completely black. So you're not going to see anything. So you're going to make sure that you have to turn on your diffuse and your specular depending on what that light is going through, if it's going through a material or not, and then decide what you need from there. But then again, let's talk about these are basically the main differences between one and the other. And let's move on here because we're still got a few things that we got to cover. So we covered the ground plane here, and let's go back to photoreal. And let's go ahead and just render the whole image. So you can see the difference here. Obviously, photoreal gives you a much more deeper and much more richer image overall. And what I'm going to do here is notice that my shadow is really, really dark right now. And what we will need to do is, because even if you try to increase our intensity here, the strength of our IBL, if you try to do that, this is going to start making the skin overblown. And this is not something that you really want to happen. So what we have to do here is, let's bring it back to 45 like we had it before. And in order for the shadow to be a little bit clearer or a little less intense, there's actually not, there isn't a parameter for you to use to make this shadow lighter. Because if we had, for example, an actual light source here, like this one over here, like the spotlight, if we bring it in and we have this selected, let's go to the modify panel, you will notice that you can actually control the shadow darkness, right? So unfortunately with the HDR, you cannot control that. So, however, one thing that you can do is, like in real lighting, you can use actually a different light to fill in that shadow. So what we're going to do here is, I'm going to make sure to turn that off. And I'm going to go ahead and just pause this for a second so we can work a little bit faster. And I'm going to go ahead and create a light. So I'm going to create a directional light, because not only do we have sunlight here, we have the sky also creating light. So we will use this as a filler. So let's go ahead and, now that we added that directional light here, let's go ahead and change the color to a bluish color, something that matches this background over here. So it's kind of like a dark blue, a little deeper there, deeper blue, something like that. Okay, that looks good. So that's good enough there. And let's go ahead and go into our attributes here, and let's take this down a bit, because we don't want the shadow to be casting a different kind of shadow here. So let's go ahead and take the intensity here to about 50. I'm sorry, 0.5. All right, and now let's go ahead and rotate this by pressing /. This will bring our gizmo up, and let's move it over there so that we actually filling in the shadow side over here. Now let's go ahead and press play here, and you will notice here how we can actually see some detail now inside our shadow. Whereas before, if we actually turn that light off completely, that shadow becomes really dark and you don't see any detail whatsoever on the ground here. So that's one way to compensate for this particular situation. So let's go ahead and keep that on. If we want to make the shadow a little bit less intense, we can add a little bit more of that light in there. So let's put maybe 0.65. And this will lighten up our shadow, but be careful that you do not create an extra shadow on the side here, because otherwise that's going to look odd, because in reality the skylight is not really directional. It comes from every single direction, so keep that in mind when you're doing this trick here. All right, so this is looking pretty good right now, and let's go into our lighting here, lighting tab here. And as you can see here, is displaying our lights, and here you have control over our image-based lighting strength. So if for some reason, and this is something to remember, is when you're changing things on the iClone side of either iClone or Character Creator 3 side of things. So if you're increasing strength here, you're basically increasing the strength of the IBL both inside CC3, and then when it does the auto conversion, then it goes straight into Iray as well. However, if you like the intensity that you have in CC3, but you want to intensify it inside the Iray side of things, it is best to go ahead and just do it within the Iray tab. So in here, you increase this. If you, for some reason, you need to increase the intensity, let's go bring it to like 1.2, for example. And this will make the overall image-based lighting brighter, but only on the Iray side and not on the CC3 side of things. All right, so let's take if you want to bring this back to defaults, you double click on the actual title of the slider, and this will bring it back to the way it was. All right, so this pretty much overall, there are other, we'll cover more about lights and the other presets over here in when we talked about animation inside iClone and Iray. However, so this is just we're going to just mostly concentrate, now that we know mostly about what the UI does, we're going to now concentrate on materials. I notice here that if you zoom in, you will notice that our helmet is penetrating the leather part of our warrior's clothing here. So what we're going to do here is there's a shortcut that allows you to bring in, if you press N, it brings in our edit pose. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the head here, and I'm just going to rotate this by pressing E. And I'm just going to move it a little bit to the side. And notice that when I moved it, nothing happened here. This is because CC3 pauses the render when you're in here. And until you're done with all the moves here and you close this menu, it's not going to update this window. Notice the second that I close this up, this will start to refresh the render. So now see, the helmet is not penetrating the leather here. So, that's a cool trick. Again, is the N key for posing if you want to bring this back and forth. And that's how you do it. Pretty easy, right? So, okay. So now let's talk about materials, which is the first tab here in our Iray render tab. Now, when you first do a preview render with Iray, it will use the auto conversion. And it does a pretty darn good job at auto converting the materials from CC3 and iClone into the Iray materials. However, sometimes you may want to change something around, and how you do that, right? So the way you do this is you have multiple parameters here, and the first ones you want to change are the multipliers. Again, anything that you change in here will only affect the Iray render and not your CC3 or iClone 3 render, iClone 7 renders. So render preview window. So this is something that you definitely want to keep in mind. So if you have something that really looks good inside iClone or inside CC3 in the preview window, in the viewport, inside the viewport, once you have all the bells and whistles turned on, notice here that some of the features here that you have for CC3 do not even affect our renders inside Iray. So for example, ambient occlusion is one of them. Notice here that you get a lot more detail now all of a sudden in here from the ambient occlusion pass here. However, notice that any changes that I'm doing here are completely being ignored because the ambient occlusion pass is a screen space ambient occlusion, whereas in Iray, it does an actual calculation for the ambient occlusion. So, keep that in mind. So again, once you have something that you really like on the viewport here, and you just want to make it better inside Iray, it's best if you just stay within the Iray tab. So for now, let's go ahead and talk about the different types of parameters you can change for materials. The first one is your base color multiplier. And again, this is mostly talking about the base color here in our CC3 area. So they match 1-to-1. The only difference between one and the other is that you don't get an iClone displaying what the map is. So, however, this is actually just a slider based, and the more you increase the multiplier, the more the pixels are going to be accentuated. So let's go ahead and render just a region over here, and let's look at this cloth over here. Notice that as I increase the multiplier in there, things are going to start to get much lighter on this side, because the brighter pixels are being multiplied by brighter pixel, and the darker pixels are getting darker. So that's the way it works, basically. So if you do this on the opposite side, notice that now this is multiplying by itself in a negative way. So now it's getting your material is getting darker. So it's basically kind of using like a brightness parameter, but it also affects also color as well. The next one is the opacity map. And the opacity map is really dependent on whether you have something in this parameter here on the CC3 side of things. So if you do not have an opacity map here, this slider will not work at all. So, and again, usually you do not want to touch the opacity slider, especially if you have something already going on there. For example, if we select the helmet, and let's take a good look here at the feather. And once you start playing with the opacity slider, notice here that our feather over there. Let's go ahead and take a look at the helmet material here. Select the helmet, and notice here we have this nice feather material here on opacity map for the feathers. Now, if you start playing with a multiplier, you might start getting some bizarre results on the rendering side of things. So so play with this at your own risk. This is not something that you really want to play too much with. I would keep this as they are, as a default. Otherwise, if you have to like make this a little bit more transparent, just go for it. But you might get some artifacts in some situations. So, keep that in mind, okay? So the next thing is bump, okay? Again, it has to do with if you have a bump map in here or not. And let's go ahead and maybe let's go to somewhere that we may have something more pronounced on the bump side of things here. So maybe let's zoom in here and make sure we have this particular material selected. So let's have the object selected, so which is our arm here. That is correct. And now let's go ahead and as you can see here, there's a very nice bump map happening here. So as we play and increase the multiplier here on the bump, you'll notice that we can start increasing the values over here of the normal map, or making things a little bit smoother and less bumpy over here. Again, self-explanatory here. Now, the next slider is ambient occlusion, and this is a very tricky one, because ambient occlusion, you really don't need an ambient occlusion map when you're rendering with Iray. These ambient occlusion maps are usually for real-time engines that it's basically done so that you can exaggerate more the ambient occlusion. But since you're using Iray, things are physically based already, so the ambient occlusion is going to be correct and you won't have to play too much with that. However, do notice that if you have an ambient occlusion map and you use the multiplier, this will do some changes. It will make it look brighter if you increase the multiplier for the ambient occlusion, or it will make it look darker if you have an ambient occlusion map already set as a default. So keep that in mind also. And sometimes you may want to completely make that ambient occlusion map turn to 0, because you will not need it, because Iray does an excellent job doing the ambient occlusion because of the ray tracing. So again, keep that in mind. You may, like I said, if you're doing renders in Iray only, you may want to get rid of those ambient occlusion maps, because you will not need them. However, if you need to cheat it in some way to make it more stylized, you may want to keep them, and play with the strength and so forth, and might help you. So it's totally up to you. Now let's talk about roughness now. So roughness, as I mentioned before, is related to blurry reflections, and the less rough the material is. So let's go ahead and select the mask over here, and let's select the helmet, not the feather, and let's go ahead and play with roughness. Notice that as we reduce the roughness, this will become more and more reflective, and notice here how the feathers are being reflected onto the helmet over there. So this is pretty simple to use, and the more roughness you are, the more blurry your reflections become. And this is basically how you control the type of metals, for example, you want. You can go from cast iron. If you, for example, you turn this all the way down to a darker color, or copper, and just by dialing these values, the roughness and the color, and then you can end up with very different materials that way. So this is a very, very useful tool. The roughness map is one of the most important tools in PBR, because it will define what kind of material it really is. And again, this works. It's very, very powerful in both inside CC3 as well as Iray, of course. So the next one is metallic. It's very important to notice here, for example, that when you see the maps here for the our shader here, again, this metallic, it has only white where is metal, and it's black where it's non-metal. And you can see it better actually if we select the skirt over here, and let's go ahead and render the skirt here. And notice that our skirt and here, our metallic map has very, very few white areas. This is because the only metallic parts here are the buckles into this belt. The rest is leather and cloth. So this is non-metal. So it's very important when you have your metallic texture to keep it either white or black, so that Iray can really respond to the proper materials. Otherwise, if you start playing around with grays in this particular map, then things are going to start breaking. The materials are going to start breaking and not going to become physically correct. So also keep that in mind. Very important. All right. So the next step here over here is how we doing in time. We're almost there. Okay. Let's go ahead and go back to Iray multiplier, and let's go ahead and talk about blend maps. Okay, so blend maps. The next one is blend maps, and this is what I used here. This is a great tool to use for aging things, or for making things wetter or bloodier, or whatever the case may be. Now, so let's go ahead and select the mask now, and I'm going to go ahead and go and bring in a blend map. Now, if you don't know where the actual blend maps are, basically they are into your iClone user, public, documents, Reallusion, templates. In this case, I'm going to go into the iClone 7 templates. because I know I have some textures there. I'm going to go to iClone templates, and then I'm going to go into textures in here. And then I am going to go into blend maps. And I'm going to go ahead and select this one over here, which is blend 01. Now notice that when I do that, all of a sudden my helmet gets darker here. And this is because what is doing a multiply is most of the image is dark and the white areas are very small. So what we want to do is actually invert this map like so. Okay, so we have mostly the darker areas are the smaller streaks. That's what we want. And however, notice that we do not have hue and saturation sliders available. They're grayed out. This is because what we loaded was a grayscale image. So what we want to do is convert this grayscale image into RGB. So to do so, I'm going to go ahead and just send it to my favorite paint program or image editing program. And I'm going to go to image mode. Notice that it's set to grayscale right now. Let's change this to RGB. And then I'm going to go ahead and save this. Just save it on top of itself and go OK. And now you'll notice that as soon as get back over here, now I have hue and saturation available. Now, if I start cranking up my saturation, you will notice here that our helmet is going to start to look bloodied. So let's go ahead and go and zoom in here. Let's go to render region here. And you will start seeing some changes happening here. All right. Okay. So let's go ahead and select other materials here. Let's select the skin, for example. I'm going to go ahead and select the skin. And before I do that, let's go ahead and select the helmet. And I'm going to go ahead and save this into my desktop. So save texture. And let's go and save this into my desktop real quick. So desktop, and I call this blood. All right, so I just saved that in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and close this so we can assign this to multiple materials. So right now there's my blood texture right there. And I'm going to go ahead and start assigning this to different materials. So let's select the skin here, for example, and add the blend map over there. So by click and dragging it in there, you'll notice now we have a little bit of blood on the skin right there. And I'm going to keep on doing this a little bit back and forth. Select the arms and go ahead and add this to the arms, and select the cloth and add it there. Select also the legs and add it there real quick. And select the shin guards, I guess. Let's go ahead and drag it in there. Select the shield and the sword. Add it there. And select the arm guard here and add it there. Okay, so that should do it over there. And if you want to apply it to the feathers, you can as well. So let's select the helmet here and apply it to the feathers as well here. So they look kind of bloody. There we go. All right. And now there we go. And now let's go ahead and set a render. And you will see how the character all of a sudden has looks like he's been just on a battle right now. So we're super close to being done now. So this is pretty much almost done. One thing that you can do that's really cool is inside your environment tab, you can play with the exposure, the highlights. You can add vignetting, so it kind of darkens the corners of the image to make it look like an old image. You can go ahead and just play with the gamma and white points and so forth. Again, this is a stylized choice. It's up to you. You can increase the saturation to make the colors pop and make this, play with the shadow side of things. So that notice that the shadows will become darker or lighter by doing this over all the image. So this is one way that you can tweak the image. Then you can play with the highlights, making the highlights stronger. And and this is good for if you're using bloom filter. This will make things bloom and make glow the brightest areas of the image. So just keep that in mind. And by controlling the radius, you can control how much it spreads the bloom. And by controlling the threshold, then you control what gets bloomed by increasing or decreasing the threshold there. So this is and the beauty of this is all in real time, and it does not need to refresh the image. So this is all. You also have templates, for example. So if you want to create a specific look, notice here went to complete white. Don't freak out. This is because sometimes by default it goes to 14. So you can just double click here to 1. And now you can play with the different looks by just clicking on the different parameters, different presets here, and you can get the look that you want. So quickly and easily, you can just get very cinematic looks or cartoony looks by simply using this kind of presets. Or if you're more into tweaking your things yourself, you can do this on your own right here. All right, so this will conclude our workflow webinar, and they let the Q&A start. All right, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I guess so. Like you mentioned, we'll move on to the Q&A section here. If you guys have any questions, we're more than happy to answer those for you. I noticed there was one question in the chat window from Cynthia regarding the video card. I believe, Chris, over there, you're running a couple of Titan video cards.
That's
right?
Correct. Okay, so in here, you will see here under hardware settings here. Right now, I'm running 2 Titan X cards, and I'm also using 10 cores of my CPU. I always like to leave 2 available to keep the responsiveness of the UI more intact, because once you start using every single resource, the UI will really start to slow down. So it's usually a good workflow to always leave a few cores available, so you can actually do some UI changes, whatever the case may be. So
yeah, good point. A very, very important section there, those settings. For those of you who may not have like the best video cards, or you have really good video cards, it doesn't really matter. Really, before you do anything, go in there and check out your settings and optimize those according to what kind of workflow you want, because that can really strongly affect the speed of your rendering. And also, like Chris said, the speed of your UI. If you have too many cores being used, it's going to really lag and slow down
your system really, really bad if you're using all your hardware available. So notice here, one thing I want to cover like real quick is this little triangle is an artifact, a shadow artifact. And one way you can really fix it real quickly is using this eliminate shadow artifact. Notice that I'm going to go ahead and do a render region here, so it does just only this area, and I'm going to click on that, and you will notice how this gets fixed. So if you ever get this bizarre little triangular shaped shadows, this is the way to fix it. And you can control the radius of how much you want to soften those artifacts. So
yeah, very good tip, very useful, because that can occur, just randomly almost.
Sometimes it happens when you have a very strong key.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, when in regards to video cards, my laptop is using a 1070 NVIDIA GTX, and that works just fine for me. I'd recommend at least 1080, or if you Mr. Moneybags like Chris over here, you can get a couple.
Right.
Okay. Anyways, let's go on to the first question here in the Q&A. This is from Peter. Peter Podesser, unrelated to today's webinar, but is there any hint that iClone will ever implement a project merge feature that you could work on sections of a scene, then combine them into a larger scene later in the workflow? As far as I know, that is not in the cards, but that's something that we could always, forward on to our development team, Peter. If you have any suggestions, just email them to us. You can email developer@reallusion.com, or even just me at kai@reallusion.com, and I'll forward those to our development team. Or the forums. We always check the forums as well. It's a good place to get your suggestions in, because we're always taking a look at the wishful features section of the forums to determine which direction to go with the product. Okay, and the next question that Peter had here was the second one. For lighting up a shadow, the extra light you added had a multiply of 0.65 and shadow was at 0. Wouldn't no shadow be generated from the extra light no matter how bright it is?
No, however, you still get a little bit of shadow going on because even if the multiplier is set to shadow to 0, this is because the multiplier for the shadow on lights are just increasing beyond the point that it originally creates.
Mm-hmm.
So you will still get let me just select the light source here. All right. So and this is mostly in the I think this feature is mostly available on the CC3 and Iray and iClone side of things more than it is on the Iray side of things, because this is actually is calculating the lights correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the one that really makes a difference when you're dealing with shadow and intensity is when you actually have a ground shadow here. So if you're playing with this ground plane, this makes a huge difference on how dark or how light that ground plane shadow is. And again, let me turn off the prop that I have here for as a ground, so you can really see the shadow here. And this when you're playing with this really makes a difference right here on how the intensity of the darkness of that shadow is.
Right. Okay. Good example. All right. So hopefully that answers your question there, Peter. Let's move on to the next one here then. Cubex here is asking, could you explain the sliders in the subsurface scattering tab as much as possible? Do you have any?
Okay, subsurface scattering, it's a huge topic unto itself.
That's
And
true. Yeah, we're gonna have some tutorials for that coming out.
it's there's so much to it. But let me just just really briefly cover that. Again, when it comes to skin, let's go ahead and select the skin here as a default. And one thing that I actually like to do is, if you don't want to actually one thing to remember is that all of these real-time tweaks that we are doing here on the image, you do not, if you're rendering in multiple passes, this is something that you not want to modify as a default. You want to keep everything, all the parameters set to the original settings, because when you render in multiple passes and you try to combine all those passes back to the original image, if you have any changes here in exposure and so forth, this will, when you put all those passes together, then will not combine to the original image. So that's something to keep in mind if you're rendering in multiple passes. And when I mean by multiple passes, I mean this compositing elements. Because what happens is when you get into a more advanced situation, especially when we start talking about iClone and Iray and animation, you will definitely want to render in passes, not only in passes when it comes to having rendered just the background separate from the character, but also in passes when it's related to the actual material passes on per character and per background. And when you're doing high-end renders, this is a very common workflow to use. In which what happens is, if you combine your glossy, your diffuse, your specular pass, and your emission pass into one image, it will add up to your RGB image. But if you have all this post-process features tweaking the image, and then you render this in passes, you will notice that when you combine those passes, the image will not add up to your final look. So this is something you want to keep in mind, and very important if you're doing advanced compositing.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think like Chris mentioned, Cubex, so subsurface scattering is a kind of a topic all on its own. And we
Oh,
will.
that's right. Sorry, I kind of deviated a little bit from there, but it was also related to that as well. I apologize for that. So again, let's go to the skin parameters, and you will notice that when we're dealing with subsurface, the parameters for skin are very different for subsurface parameters if we turn this on for other objects. They come with different menus and different things. So one thing to remember is that you got to know what your target is in as far as materials. So for example, if I bring in an object from somewhere else, I'm going to bring in this tear shape object. Let's see, maybe this one. And I'm going to go ahead and just okay, so I'm going to bring this in. I'm going to turn my character off. Let's stop this for a little while here. And I'm going to go ahead and just bring this up. This is a very simple morph shape that I use for the bouncing ball, just in case you're wondering where I got this shape from. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off the character. So let's go ahead and turn off the character and everything that goes with the character here, so that all we have here is going to be the prop visible. So where's my prop? Here, up sphere. There we go. All right. So we don't even want the ground. The ground, we can turn it off. All right. So let's go ahead and look at the properties here real quick. And you will notice that here the diffuse is super dark. So I'm going to go ahead and take that off and keep this like this. And now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and just scale this on one axis here. So it's kind of flattened like so. And let's go ahead and render that real quick. So, and one thing to remember is in order to get subsurface scatter is good if you want to make glass or liquids, that kind of material. So let's go ahead and go into the Iray side of things. And I'm going to go ahead and just go to subsurface scattering and turn that on. And all of a sudden, this is going to look kind of interesting, because first we got to make sure that we're going to convert this from traditional to PVR. And second, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take the roughness here. And this is very important. The roughness parameter goes hand in hand with subsurface scattering here. And you'll notice here that as I turn subsurface scattering on, you can't really see the transparency of your object here. And this is because it's directly related to your roughness parameters. So if we reduce here using the multiplier, we reduce the roughness here, you will notice now that we have this beautiful crystal here. And the crystal here is based, again, transparency is directly related to roughness. So if you have a high roughness value, you're not going to get that crystal look at all. And this looks faceted. So this could be literally, you can make this a gem, for example. And for example, if you want to create this like a sapphire or something like this, this is exactly where you want to play with your subsurface scattering and the proper index of refraction. And for example, if you want to make a sapphire, let me see. Let me show you some really cool. You can go, first of all, if you're wondering where do I get all these parameters, basically from the web. So if I need to find out, for example, over here, I went into the web and started researching. Okay, so what is the proper color for a sapphire? And here are for the RGB color space is telling me, okay, so it's composed of 5.9% red. So if I'm going to go ahead here and select under my material color, and I can go ahead and select in here under diffuse color, let's go ahead and just put that value in. So for red is about 5.9, so I'm going to go put 6 here. For green, it's 32. And for blue, it's going to be 73. So now by changing those values here, you will notice things are going to start to happen here. And what we want to do is make sure that our subsurface parameters here is we have our translucency set all the way up. Okay. And next, what we want to do is our index of refraction. And again, our index of refraction, and you can easily find out by going to the web and just doing a search for, let me just bring this up. Let's go ahead and just go over here, bring the tab over here so you can see what I'm doing here. So you go index of refraction for sapphire. There we go. And you can do a quick search for that. And see here, so for sapphire is 1.76. So that's how I found out what the value was for the index of refraction. So if you start playing with these values over here, 0.76 for refraction here, and then for the ebb number, here is 72.2. So let's go ahead and type that in, 72.2. And then you're going to start seeing that this is going to start to look more and more like a sapphire. So again, let's this is something that you got to keep in mind here is the brightness values of this situations here, and the thickness of the actual models, because thickness has a lot to do with refraction. So keep that in mind. Is very important for that. Another thing that you can do is, if you want to get a true specs and true physical parameters, actually is if once you get the Iray plugin, it comes with a whole bunch of material libraries. And this is something that you can use. For example, it comes with 600 materials. And if you go actually to your gems, you actually will find here, for example, sapphire. So you can go ahead and just bring that in, and all of a sudden you have your perfect sapphire material there. So, however, if you do it manually, you could eventually get to this point, by playing with all the parameters. But sometimes it's best to just make sure that you see if you already have something, a preset that is already made for you. So hopefully that helps. Now just remember that this has it's a lot fewer parameters, but it's a lot more accurate here. So however, if you want to reset this back to the way it was before with the auto conversion, you can always click on this little button here, and this will bring you back to the auto conversion situation. And again, you can apply whatever the subsurface effects that you may want. So hopefully that helped.
Okay, hopefully that's enough for you there, Cubex. A little mini tutorial on subsurface scattering. We're going to move to the next question from Kurt here. Will Iray use the combined RAM of multiple video cards?
Right now, no. No, what it does is sends the same scene to both cards, and you will render different parts of the image on each different card to accelerate. Hopefully, when RTX gets implemented into Iray, then yes, that will happen, because the new NVLink does exactly that. It will actually combine the RAM of both video cards for a bigger, so you can render bigger scenes with it. But right now, as it is, no.
Yeah, the way I currently understand it is, even if you have double cards, you're only going to be basically using the RAM of one card for your Iray rendering.
Well, yeah, but if you have multiple cards, what it does is uses the same amount of RAM on both cards, by splitting the scene that way, and then rendering different parts of the image. So, but it does not share. But so if you have two cards that have 8 gigs, you're not going to get 16 gigs of RAM.
Right. Yeah.
Available.
All right. Good little tip there. Let's see, Emmanuel. All these teachings for CC will apply to the iClone Iray animation too.
Yes.
Yeah, I think basically everything that's been talked about here is
exactly
pretty much the same for iClone and Character Creator 3. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so Frank is asking as well for the project merge feature. So maybe that's something we should write down, merging two projects together. Have you ever had a situation where you needed to merge a couple projects, Chris?
Well, actually, Iray kind of is doing that, especially on the iClone side of things, because what it's doing is it can combine your static objects versus your animated objects and combine them. So if you think about it that way, is actually Iray is kind of doing that already. However, the way they're thinking about it is not available yet within the possibilities.
Yeah, I've written it down, guys, so don't worry. We can I'll forward it to the team since we had a couple requests now. Jen has a good question about how to make skin look the most realistic. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, when it comes to skin, again, the auto conversion does a pretty good job, I think. However, sometimes it tends to make the skin look a little bit kind of dry-ish. So let's go ahead and just bring the character again in here. Just make sure that we have the armor in here first, so he doesn't look naked when we
He's
bring
trapped
it
in a
in.
blue balloon.
And yeah, let's go ahead and get this sphere out of here. Just delete that. Okay, and again, let's remember, if you want to bring in the camera like it was before, just remember to save that camera so you can bring this back the way it was. And let's talk about a little bit about the skin. Yes, the skin comes in a little bit, and again, let's go ahead and do a center render here real quick. One thing that you might want to tweak that I like to do is a couple of things for the skin. One is okay. It's I'm going to multi-select all the skins, everything that's named skin here, so I can do changes all at the same time. And what I like to do here is inside. Actually, it has to be done in here. And let's go ahead and select the skins in here. And what I like to do is the roughness overall seems a little too dry for the skins. What I would like to do is make the brightness of the roughness map darker, which means it makes it a little bit brighter. So I'm going to go ahead and just select this region over here so we can concentrate just on the skin. And I like to go ahead and make it a little bit darker, not by much, but just enough to get a little bit more of a specular hit on the skin itself. And this will do it on all the parameters at once. So you will notice, now you have a little bit more glistening on the skin going on there. Don't go too much, because otherwise it will look sweaty, so it looks disgusting. But just a little bit, it will definitely look, add to it. And another thing I like to do is sometimes the skin tend to look a little bit too pale for my taste. So what I like to do is change the diffuse color and add a little bit of extra color here on the diffuse, and just add a little bit more of a red tint or pinkish tint to it. It doesn't have to be too much, just a little bit makes a huge difference. And now you'll see, as soon as it has a little more vibrant tone to the skin, as opposed to this pale skin that's going on here. So and that really brings up a little bit more the realism to the skin. So hope that helps.
You ever use any subsurface scattering on the skin at all?
And well, the subsurface scattering is already turned on, and the default parameters actually are pretty good. So I wouldn't touch that.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't really done much experimentation with the subsurface scattering, so I'm just kind of curious.
So again, and if you want to make something like look alien or something like that, then you can just go ahead and start playing with the colors, for example, here. And you will see that all of a sudden this will have a more greenish tone to it, and let's make this a little bit blue, for example, for the subsurface, for anything that's under the skin. And you will notice here in areas that are smaller, and again, you're not going to see too much of a difference, particularly in this area, because this is a very thick geometry. So subsurface scattering works really well on thinner geometry. And so let's go ahead, for example, and make the helmet invisible. And let's take a closer look at the face. So let's concentrate on the head here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the helmet, and I am going to zoom in here a little bit into the head here. And just turn that off. Notice here that the lips are blue now. And again, this is because of the subsurface scattering. Also, look at the ears over here, how you have a blue tint. This is because of the we tweaked this this color here. Let's make sure that we have the character selected, the skin selected for the character here. So actually we changed it on all of them at once. So notice here that we changed the base color and the medium color. The medium color is what makes that gives it that reddish tone. So when we originally had it, and so if we go back, for example, to that again, this reddish tone for the subsurface, you will notice that this will look a lot more natural. And again, like I said, the default color was a good color to have. So again, if you don't like a particular setting, if you change something and you don't like it, you can go back to the original auto conversion by simply resetting that. So now that I have all those three materials reset, it went back to the original medium color, which was that pinkish color. So again, if you need to make that translucency look a little more reddish, what you do is you add a little extra color here in this particular setting, and that will add a little more reddish tone to the thinner areas of the geometry.
Yeah, I think especially areas like the ears, it's very easy to
Yes,
see
yeah,
subsurface.
exactly. And the way you can really see this is if you, for example, you just simply add for example, if I want to add a point light here, and I am going to move it around so that it goes behind the ear. So again, just I'm going to press Control Q to use the old gizmos, and I just bring it forward here, and make sure it's bring it in and drop it down a little bit. All right, so now you can see how that light is really making that ear glow right there. So that's basically what subsurface scattering is all about, and you can really really jumps out when you have a light source going through a thin material or a thin geometry, and you have subsurface on, and that's when you can really see that subsurface happening.
Yeah, that's a good example, I think, for subsurface guys. I mean, it's important a lot, especially close-ups of like stuff like the face or the fingers or stuff like that. Subsurface
Right.
scattering can be
Oh,
very.
if you don't want to see this little white dot inside the render, you can always make sure that it's invisible.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah,
renders the light is still on, but it's not visible to the camera. Just by the way, just if you are curious about that.
yeah, making it invisible in iClone doesn't make it stop working in the Iray.
Exactly.
Okay, we
Actually, it doesn't do it in iClone either or Iray either. It's when you turn this one off.
Yeah, right. You have to activate or deactivate it.
Right.
We had a couple of questions about popcorn effects being adapted into Iray. I haven't heard anything about that myself. I could be out of the loop on that. Have you heard anything, Chris, at all? Or
No. There seems to be an issue right now because of the way popcorn works is basically a whole bunch of image planes being spewed out of an emitter, and that's having a lot that creates some issues with Iray. When you have multiple of them at the same time, so that's something that that they're working on, but nothing in the immediate future.
I can just
That I know
imagine how
of.
intense processor wise it would be, to render all the popcorn effects stuff like that in Iray, all those, separate image planes, like you could have
Yeah.
at once. And so it's probably a pretty. I mean, I'm not an engineer by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm pretty sure it's
However, just keep in mind that now that we have an Iray inside working with iClone as well, what's really cool is that you can actually use some of the Iray capabilities, such as the render elements, and you can combine your Iray render with your iClone renderer, and you can mix them together using the render elements. So this is something to keep in mind. I'm sure in the future we'll do a tutorial on how to do that. It's actually not that complicated, and because the renders will become one-to-one, whether you render in iClone or in Iray, as far as the placement of the characters and cameras, everything is being used using the same thing. You will be able to mat out different the particles against the Iray render. And that will allow you to have particles in front and behind the characters or whatever prop you have inside the scene. So this is something that you can actually do with advanced compositing. Right
Good
now.
workaround solution there.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to the next one.
If people are interested, maybe I can do one on my own, stuff in 3D YouTube channel, and just let me know.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting actually, because I mean we've had 2 people here ask about it, so it's a
Okay.
reasonable amount of demand.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard people, they've emailed me in the past for popcorn effects and Iray as well.
Sure.
Okay, so David asks, what is the effect on the backside of the model? Example, is this 3D? Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's definitely a 3D model. David, for you there. You know, the effect on the backside of the model really depends on where the lighting is, where the camera is, and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, you can go. Obviously, it's 3D. Many different angles you can go from. Subdiacon here is asking, making dust, clouds, rain, and snow in Iray. I think you could sort of use the technique that you just mentioned.
True. You,
Yeah,
you
to do
could
that.
use that technique in order to combine. You can also combine again, this is more in the compositing side of things, because there are render elements already keyed out. Again, actual live elements, like that someone went in green screen rain and green screen explosions, green screen dust, and you already have all those components. I believe Video Copilot has a very nice elements library that you can get that has all of it already beautifully green screen with mats and everything ready for you to composite in. And again, this would go hand in hand with an Iray render, so you can actually have actual smoke coming, just by the feet of the character, and put it in front and behind the character, and make it look like it belonged there in the first place. So this is something to also to keep in mind once you get into more advanced situations of compositing.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, that's possibly a topic for a future webinar, tutorial, whatever.
Absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely more advanced, but definitely doable.
Okay. David asks here, can I work on my 3D model textures and then export them to Unity projects, for example? Yep, that's an easy question to answer there, David. We
Hmm.
have a bunch. I'd recommend everyone check out our learning center. We have the, I'll put in the chat window here, iClone. The learning center shows all our tutorial videos, and we're launching more like every day or every week, basically. I'll just throw the link in the chat window here for you guys. Are these really the most recent ones? Yeah, I guess. Okay. Well, anyways, this is a link that I'll throw in the chat window here for you guys. You can take a look on your own time. If I can find where my chat window went. There it is. Hold on a second here. There we go. All right, so that's just our basically every site, every product will have a learning center, and this is the one for iClone. Okay, we'll just go from there, because that's a pretty there's a bunch of tutorials on there that talk about exporting to Unity and Unreal. I just finished those last month, so yeah, definitely check those out.
Absolutely, very cool tutorials. Yep.
Okay, and Anthony, in iClone, do you have a recommended workflow for sequences?
Again, this is definitely something we definitely will talk about on part 2 of this of the webinar, because there's a lot to talk about, especially when you start working with iClone and animation, because you really need to start thinking about being a lot more organized, especially if you want any kind of feedback, real-time feedback, when you're working within inside Iray and iClone together. Again, a lot of things to cover. One key thing is basically your animated object list is a very important thing. Actually, you did a tutorial, actually, didn't you, Kai, on how to optimize that part?
I think so, back in the day, yeah. I vaguely recall.
Yeah, so basically, it's, if you have object lists in here, it will cache, especially when you have the timeline open in here and you try to scrap things, and you have your Iray preview window open. You will notice that refreshing from one frame to another could take quite a long time. But if you have things in your animated object list, the refreshing time gets exponentially sped up when it's inside this list. So again, this is part of the workflow you would do if you're animating with Iray. One thing about Iray is currently does not have motion blur, so this is something you would have to do in post. And even though you cannot export the vector motion render elements within the inside here within Iray. You can actually, in certain packages such as Fusion, for example, you can import the FPX scene. You can export this as an XPX, import it into something like Fusion, and then Fusion itself will create those vectors for you, and you can use the motion blur from there and apply it to the images afterwards. So, but again, this is super advanced compositing stuff, but it is possible.
All right, coolio. Yeah, I think next question will go to Peter here. Using the blend map the way you did with the black and white to RGB was a great tip. How would you use it to make things look wet instead of bloody?
Well, again, well, then what you would do, okay, let's go back to here.
And it kind of goes back to the
yeah, it also has to do with you would want to use that same blend map as part of your roughness map. So you may want to combine that. Another thing that you could do is, if you want to make things wet, actually a good tool to use that maybe is using the coding, and you can apply a map to that. So
oh yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah,
that could, use map. You can tell to use map, and then just bring that map in here. Let's see if it'll allow me to do that over here. Let's see.
Probably have to tweak the positioning of that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. You would have to tweak the position for that, but and the UVs, because right now it's going to fall exactly where the blood is.
Right.
But if you start playing, with the strength of the coding and so forth, then you would definitely start looking like beads of rain or streaked out. But again, this is static, so this is just for still images. You wouldn't work for animation.
Right.
So that's something to keep in mind.
Okay. Hopefully that answers your question there, Peter. Kurt has a bit of a technical one here. Back to performance enhancements. Is there any idea or any future for Vulkan support? I hear it doesn't require SLI and takes advantage of multiple GPUs with support for multi-core GPU or CPU and GPU. I really can't answer that question there for you, Kurt.
I haven't heard anything yet, so I have no idea if there's going to be support or not.
Yeah, I hate to sound like a broken record there, unfortunately, Kurt, but we don't really know. I mean, we just basically launched this, I think, last month, was it?
Yeah, it was about a month.
Early February, I think, or late January. We launched this. So, in terms of future development, we're working on it, but it's still quite a new product.
There's some cool features coming from Iray that has not been implemented yet, but we cannot talk about that yet. But
yeah, basically, you take a look at the Iray stuff, and that's at some point in the future we'll probably have it, but we don't have any idea as to timeline.
One thing though is the autoconverter does an excellent job. I mean, I was surprised how easy it. Definitely a lot easier than Indigo. So
yeah, we've improved a lot since those days. Yeah. So much easier. Oh my goodness. Okay. Okay, so looks like Peter really wants a composite popcorn effects and Iray iClone tutorial. Okay, so some more support for that. Emmanuel asks, can you please share the name or the link for the Iray effects you mentioned? That was the...
Oh, the Iray effects? You mean inside here? Inside the environment and the tone mappers? Is that what he's talking about?
I'm not sure. Oh, the dust effect and stuff like that.
That was a Video Copilot product.
Yeah, Video Copilot, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So Video Copilot, you can just basically Google Video Copilot, Emmanuel, and you'll find the
and it has a whole library of just beautifully keyed already live components. And here's maybe a little example. I don't know if this is the correct one, because I have a whole bunch of Video Copilot stuff. We have some good stuff there. So, but yeah, just do a search of Video Copilot, and I think it's called Action something effects. The package.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I mean, just head to the Video Pilot site there, Emmanuel. You've got tons of stuff there, and you have a bit of time. You can probably browse and find it.
Hmm.
Question here from anonymous attendee. Let's see. Unity, the export to Unity question was about baking your renders into the models. Lighting and environmental color or GI. Have you done any workflow like that? I think it's kind of, the wording's kind of confusing. You're baking your renders into models, or lighting, environment.
So basically, I think he's talking about light baking, but that's a
Yeah.
feature that you do within Unity, not within either CC3 or iClone.
Yeah, I think that's something that you can't really, I wouldn't recommend.
And Iray does not support right now. I don't believe it supports light baking,
Yeah.
at least not within our plugin. And
Yeah.
oh, here it
We don't have
is.
a workflow for that for sure. I'm just still kind of trying to read the words here. It's kind of
For
weird.
those that are curious, this is what I was talking about. They have two versions. They have a 720p and a 2K version of those essential. So just it's so as you can see here, they have all kinds of stuff like explosion, glass, smoke, fire, all kinds of really cool stuff that is already keyed. And when you do compositing, it gives you the perfect image.
Yeah,
So
that'll be awesome. That'd be a good one to get
yeah.
for what is it? 249.95.
Yeah, it's not bad. I mean, I have the 720p and they work really well. So
Okay. One final question here from Subdiacon again is wondering about your thoughts on whether or not RTX will replace Iray in your mind.
no, I don't think it will replace it. It would be enhanced by Iray.
Yeah.
Oh, but however, if you're talking about on the real time rendering side of things, it will definitely make it our PBR pipeline, our rendering engine, a lot more powerful. That's for sure. But you're still cheating, no matter what you're doing. When you're working in real time, you're cheating things to get them look to the way they look, and and you can you can only cheat so much in real time, before they start breaking stuff. It doesn't look correct. So again, sure, the reflections are going to be more accurate, and the reflections are going to be more accurate, a little bit more accurate, and sure, when you're doing screen space reflections, it's better than using RTX will be better than that, because anything that's outside the camera will be reflected as well in RTX, whereas in screen space reflection, it does not. Once an item goes out of camera, it will not reflect anymore inside what's being reflected inside the view of the camera. So it will definitely look better, but I don't think it will completely replace uh, uh, a software or hardware renderers such as Octane or Redshift or any of those renderers, because they're definitely more accurate overall, and you'll get a much more refined image. But again, it all depends the kind of quality you're looking for, and by quality I mean the style you're looking for. If you're looking for photorealism versus stylized photorealism, and there's so many parameters that we can talk about, and there are many philosophies out there, but it all boils down to what the artist likes. So
Exactly. And I think one of the good things about working in real time these days is that all the
you
best
don't have to,
developments are happening in real time.
right, and you don't have to wait for an image for 5-10 minutes depending on your video card.
Yeah.
And sure that like you saw this character, how fast I was rendering a full character, but it was rendered against a backdrop, an HDR backdrop. The more pixels that actually it needs to render from that image, the longer those renders are going to take. This is why it's very important to render in layers, because what's going to happen is you don't want to have to re-render something once you render it, even if it takes a long time. So a background, for example, once you have the lighting correct, you want to render just that background without the characters in it, because if you have to do a tweak afterwards to re-render the character because you changed the animation of the character, then all of a sudden you're gonna go, oh, I need to render the backgrounds again, and those backgrounds took like 20 minutes per frame. So this is why you want to render in layers, so you don't have to re-render everything. You just render portions of the image, and that makes the image render faster.
Right on. Okay. I guess one final question from Cubex here is regarding Is there any plans to have edit mesh and iClone directly, like a deformer instead of permanent change by creating keys, like the morph deformer? I don't know. To be honest, I think the edit mesh tool will be possibly integrated into iClone in the future, but I don't have any direction for that. It's probably going to be a ways off if it is. Probably nothing in the immediate future, and as far as I know.
True.
Yeah. So okay, I think we'll just end it off there. So thanks so much, Chris, for joining us today and telling us all about the your thoughts on Iray and your workflow and pipeline and everything like that. Really helpful, I think, to everyone here. We got a lot of good feedback.
Absolutely.
Already.
If there are any other questions that haven't been answered here, you're welcome to go to. I go through the forum often. I don't get a chance to post many things, but I do read at least once a day or twice a day. I mean, every 2 days, check the forum to see if there's anything new. So if you address it to me, inside my thread, there's a thread going on there with Stockholm 3D gallery there. If you have a question, just post it there, and if I can answer it and give you some images to answer that question, I'll gladly do it. So again, I don't have a lot of free time, but when I do have it, I do like to share it and and help out.
Cool. All right. So yeah, I think we'll end it off there. Everyone, just as a reminder here, we are recording this webinar, so this will be available. I will send a link out to you via email. You can watch it again and go back and review things. In addition, again, we're going to be sending out that survey for you, like I mentioned. Make sure you fill it out and get a 10% discount from the content store. And yeah, I think that about does it. So Chris, my friend, thanks so much for being with us here today again.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll see you again in the near future. And thanks everyone for attending.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye,
Good
guys.
night.